Hey everybody, Big Friendly here. Okay, I think I'm gonna like this video. I've dug up some new articles from the archives that just, with different stuff related to video games from back in the early 80s. I think y'all will enjoy those. We're gonna do a quick recap of what happened in 83 and 84, and then we will get into the 5 games that I feel like the crash had an effect on and probably deserve to be remembered better than they are. And I know some of y'all aren't gonna like what I pick, or there might be one that I missed, so you definitely let me know in the comments, all right? Let's go! I'm sure most of you have already heard the story. If you happen to be a younger person that doesn't know a lot about old video game history, I'll tell you. Atari, in the middle of a total market collapse, was forced to bury thousands and thousands of unsold game cartridges into a landfill in the New Mexico desert. It's become the defining, almost mythical image of the great video game crash of 1983. For many years, the story, despite there being newspaper evidence that it was true, many people didn't believe it. You had some that believed it and some that were like, no, why would they do that? That's so stupid, it never happened. Finally, in 2014, they had an excavation that finally proved it to be true. And they dug up thousands of games, a lot of ETs and a lot of Pac-Mans, but there were others also. But the real buried treasures from that era weren't just in a landfill. There were some really, really good games that got lost in all the chaos of the crash. The industry's revenue plummeted by an unbelievable 97%. And in that tidal wave of cheap shovelware, awful games mostly, there were some true titles that got overlooked, underappreciated. And today we're going to dig up 5 of those games. These are the forgotten pioneers that were figuratively buried by the crash and deserve to be remembered. The great video game crash was a perfect storm, and many of the companies were their own worst enemies. The market was flooded with consoles also, not just games. Atari had 2 systems in the market, the 2600 and the 5200. Coleco had their ColecoVision. Mattel had their Intellivision. The Odyssey was still around. So you had all these consoles competing with one another. And people immediately and companies realized in 1981 and early 82 that anybody with a garage and a soldering iron, from big brand corporations to cereal companies, could just slap a label on their own cartridge and try to make a quick buck. This created a crisis of confidence. Retailers who had previously in 1981 were begging for more games because they couldn't keep their retail shelves stocked, were now drowning in unsold games, piles of shovelware, and the gamers lost faith in the system. In the middle of this mess, it wasn't just the bad games that suffered. There were some amazing titles released at the worst possible time, and a lot of them were pretty much forgotten, denied the audience they really deserved. We're going to count down 5 of them, and the game we're going to start with proves right up front that looks can be so deceiving. Coming in at number 5 is a game that on the surface looks laughably simple. Frogs and Flies, released by M Network, Mattel's video game division. This title is a perfect example of a game that got lost not because it was bad, but because it was subtle in a market that was screaming for attention. The setup is simple. You're a frog on a lily pad, and you have to jump back and forth to each side and try to catch flies with your tongue. You can play against a computer or against a friend, or should I say a sibling. Back in the day, that was usually the case. And the goal was just to eat more flies than your opponent before sunset. It was really cool. I mean, the screen actually got darker as the game went along. I know that sounds primitive, but the genius of Frogs and Flies is in its surprisingly deep controls. You can do short, steep jumps or long, graceful arcs to snag a fly. But if you leap too far, you'll splash into the pond, wasting time as your frog swims back to get on the lily pad. It was real satisfying whenever you could leap across and actually snag 2 flies at once. That was always a really cool when you could pull that off. This game, like many, was developed right in that time where things were changing fast in 1982. And it was the Atari 2600 of the Intellivision game Frog Bob. Its programmer, David Rolfe, hope I'm saying that right, was a big deal at Mattel. He even created the Intellivision's operating system. But despite that pedigree, Frogs and Flies never became a household name. It was a quiet, charming game that required timing and patience. In a world full of explosive games that had space battles and things like that, a game about 2 frogs chilling on a pond was easy to overlook or even dismiss. But for those who played it, they found an addictive game with a ton of personality, right down to the chirping crickets at the end. It's an excellent game that was just too modest for its time. Our 4th entry drops you into a dark, claustrophobic world of suspense and strategy. This is Dark Cavern, and it is an absolute crime this game isn't more famous. Another M Network release from 1982, Dark Cavern is the Atari 2600 port of the Intellivision hit Night Stalker. But calling it a simple port doesn't do it justice. It's a faster, more intense take that stands on its own as a brilliant and sometimes very intense gaming experience. In Dark Cavern, you're trapped in a maze and hunted by relentless robots. I know what you're thinking. Didn't Atari port a fantastic version of Berserk to the 2600 that same year? Sure they did. But the object of Dark Cavern isn't just to destroy the enemy robots. Oh, you can do that, but it's destroying them fast enough to rack up a really high score and a free life that makes this game exciting. You see, the genius of Dark Cavern is in the game's risk versus reward scoring system. The robot's default color is purple, and you can get 1,000 points for hunting down and destroying purple robots. But doesn't 5,000 points and a free life sound so much better? Well, getting those 5,000 point robots isn't going to be easy. You're going to have to earn it. You see, the robots have 4 different colors, and each color awards more points than the previous one did. As previously mentioned, purple robots will net you a paltry 1,000 points, but the red robots get you 2,000, and the green ones award you 3,000. It's the 4th color, yellow, the yellow robots you must destroy to get that 5,000 points and an additional life. I can hear you now saying, okay, Big Friendly, I'll just simply destroy them in order and rack up a boatload of yellow points and go back to playing good old Berserk. Oh no, it's not that easy, pal. You only have a few seconds to destroy the robots before they switch back to their previous color. And I swear those sneaky little bastards know this and they will toy with you. But there's something else you have to contend with besides the robots. You also have spiders and blobs lurking around in the maze, and they can't kill you, but they can be a colossal pain in the ass. The spiders will sting you, and you will be paralyzed for a few seconds, and at the mercy of any robot that spots you in this frozen state. Fortunately, the blobs aren't like the ones in the old movies. They don't absorb you. They just steal all of your ammo, leaving you with nothing but your wits, as you now have to wait for the next ammo dump to appear so you can continue with your assault. That's right. Unlike every other shooter that was ever released for any console in that era, you don't have unlimited ammo. You start the game with 20 rounds, and periodically you will see a pistol start blinking in the maze. If you can get to that pistol before it disappears, you will be awarded an additional 10 rounds of ammunition. In Dark Cavern, the mechanic flips the script from a basic shooter to a tense game of cat and mouse. You can't just run around blasting. You have to be tactical, stalking the robots and waiting for the perfect moment to strike before the robots can fire back and eliminate you. The robots are clever too. At first they only fire straight ahead, so you can hunt them down from behind and they won't see you. But as you rack up points, advanced 2-headed robots show up that can fire in multiple directions, keeping you on edge. I love how intense the game's background sound effects get as things get faster and more chaotic. You know, as your score goes up, it's really cool. Released into a market that was drowning in games, Dark Cavern was a casualty of that oversaturation. It didn't have the name recognition of an arcade port like Berserk, so it got lost in the shuffle. But its focus on stealth and strategy was way ahead of its time, creating an atmosphere of genuine dread that made you think, not just react. For that, Dark Cavern is a title that is a true buried treasure. Coming in at number 3, we have a game from a developer, a beloved developer, known for pushing the Atari 2600 to its absolute limits, a Magic. In 1983, a Magic released Laser Gates, a horizontal shooter that was way more sophisticated than most anything else out there. But its release lined up perfectly with the start of the crash, making it one of the biggest creative casualties of the industry's collapse. The story is pure sci-fi fun. A supercomputer that maintained galactic peace has gone haywire. Sounds kind of like the old Terminator thing there. And you have to fly your ship, the Dante Dart, through its core to shut it down. What makes Laser Gates a masterpiece is that it's a shooter that actually makes you think. It's not just about blasting enemies, it's about navigating the daily laser gates. These gates flash in and out of existence, slam shut to crush you, or have tiny moving gaps you have to line up with perfectly, all while dodging homing missiles. My only complaint about this forgotten gem is that the ship's gauges take up half the playfield. It reminds me a little bit of how 20th Century Fox's Flash Gordon was set up, but it doesn't bother me nearly as much when I play Laser Gates as it did on Flash Gordon. And while we're on it, you have to keep an eye on those gauges, because every time you bump into a force field or take a hit from an enemy, you lose energy and shield. So do get power-ups along the way so you can recharge them though. You just have to keep your eyes open and pick them up when they show up. This was a game that respected your intelligence. It was tough but fair, complex but intuitive. It was everything a sequel to a game like Defender should have been, but it was born at the worst possible moment. Magic, sadly, was just hours away, or a day or two, maybe a day or two away from going public when Atari surprisingly announced their financial losses earlier than expected, which caused Magic to back off from going public. And as a result, later on down the line, they were one of the first major third-party developers to go under during the crash, and masterpieces like Laser Gates were left behind. It really is a cool game. Our runner-up is a game so ambitious and sprawling that many consider it an early form of the Metroidvania genre, way before that term even existed. This is Montezuma's Revenge, a game designed by a 16-year-old programming prodigy, Robert Jaeger. Again, I hope I'm getting that last name right. And published by Parker Brothers in 1984. You play as the explorer Panama Joe, diving deep into the cursed pyramid of the Aztec Emperor Montezuma II. The pyramid is a massive 9-floor labyrinth with 99 rooms full of traps, enemies, and secrets. Unlike the simple side-scrollers of the day, Montezuma's Revenge demanded real exploration. You had to find keys for doors, collect swords to fight enemies, and grab torches to light your way through the pitch-black chambers deep inside the pyramid. The complexity was just mind-blowing for the Atari 2600. It had an inventory system, locked doors, and a huge non-linear map. You had to uncover one painful room at a time. You could climb ladders, slide down poles, and leap over fire pits, all while dodging spiders and rolling skulls. It was a huge game. Originally developed as a 48K file for the Atari 800 computer, the fact that Parker Brothers shrunk it into a 16K cartridge for the 2600 while keeping its incredible gameplay is a technical marvel. But it arrived in 1984, well after the shakeup of the gaming market had already started. And it never got the attention it deserved on Atari's console. It definitely remains a cult classic for those brave enough to venture into its depths. But one game stands above them all as the ultimate lost masterpiece for the Atari 2600. It is the system's technical swan song, a game so advanced it feels like it belongs on a next-generation console. This is Solaris, released in 1986. By 1986, the video game world had moved on. The Nintendo Entertainment System was taking over, and that's what everybody wanted. The Atari 2600 was ancient history by this time. But in that forgotten landscape, Atari quietly released one last stunner, programmed by Douglas Neubauer, the creator of the legendary Star Raider. Yeah! Love that game. For the 5200. Solaris is its true spiritual successor. It was so advanced it required a special 16K bank switching cartridge to handle its massive scope. In Solaris, your mission is to find the lost planet of Solaris while defending the galaxy from the evil Xylons. What follows is a space opera on a single cartridge. You navigate a galactic map of 16 quadrants, each with 48 sectors, creating a massive universe to explore. You warp between systems, get into intense first-person dogfights, and even land on planets to refuel and make repairs. The visuals are just amazing for the 2600. The game features 3D space combat and smoothly scrolling planetary surfaces that seem impossible for the hardware. This wasn't just another high-score chase. It was a game with a destination and an ending. You had to manage resources, navigate a complex map, and survive against overwhelming odds to finally reach Solaris. It was originally developed as a tie-in for the movie The Last Starfighter, but the project was shelved during the crash. It was only revived in 1986 when Atari released a new budget version for the 2600, but by then it was too late. The world was obsessed with Nintendo, and Solaris, arguably one of the most technical and impressive games ever made for the Atari 2600, was almost completely ignored. It is the crown jewel of lost games, a ghost from a fallen empire that showed the world what Atari was truly capable of right at the very end. Okay, now the cool thing about doing these lists is you could have 1,000 people do this exact same thing that played these games back then, and I doubt 2 people would come up with the exact same thing, exact same list in the same order. So tell me, which ones would you put in here? And another thing, did anybody out there ever finish Solaris? Did you actually find the planet? I'd love to know that too. Thanks to the following: like, subscribe, share. See you next time. Bye-bye.